It's the end of the year, and everyone is going to tell you that if you want to progress in your career, you should absolutely be setting goals. Except I stopped doing it years ago. Here's why, and here's why maybe you should too. I'm no self-help guru, and in fact I get easily annoyed with that whole trend. But as someone with a deep passion for music and for my work, at the beginning of my career I became obsessed with the idea of setting goals year by year. I had this ritual of writing down everything I wanted to achieve, and I would go into the new year full of hope for the amazing milestones that my career or my business would have reached. I went through two different stages with this. At first, I would simply set unrealistic goals, or even worse, goals that were not really actionable, goals that were not dependent on me doing something. I would write down things like, next year I'll get to score a very beautiful feature film, or next year I'll magically work on an amazing video game. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I believed in the magical musical fairy that would come to me and send me amazing projects to work on. I was working very hard, I was networking, writing music, I was constantly building a catalog of tracks that would get placed on ad campaigns, TV shows, trailers, and that still contributes substantially to paying my bills. It's just that it was never enough. The projects I'd work on were never big enough or never meaningful enough. I understand very clearly now that this frustration would come from failing to accept the fact that while we can do our best to set us up for success, whatever that means, or make our own luck, we don't really have any control over the people we meet along the way, over the opportunities we get, over the stuff that would happen. And the second big mistake that I would make was failing to realize that goals and ambitions change even within a year. I personally think that this mistake is even more paralyzing than the failure to set actionable goals. The problem with this is that we are creatives, we are artists, we are complex and temperamental and deep. We can't measure success exclusively with traditional business metrics. And more importantly, I think that to grow as creative individuals is important to embed flexibility in the systems that we use to measure growth. Now, I'm obviously not saying that setting goals is intrinsically harmful or that you shouldn't have milestones and ambitions. What I'm saying is that the way you set goals should leave room for afterthoughts and changes of strategy. So here's what I do, and as strange as it might sound, this is the only framework that works for me long term. I am a firm believer that the only thing we have truly control over is what we do with our time. I am kind of obsessed with this idea actually. I block time to complete tasks on my calendar, and as a result of this, I end up with accurate data on the time that I spend working. I have a system that splits tasks in different categories, and at the end of the year, I look at the data and define time spending targets on the tasks that I know will contribute to get me where I want to be. I guess you could still say that I set goals and that I just have another name for it. It's just that they focus exclusively on how I spend time rather than on other measurements. I think it would be quite cool to give you a proper overview of how I exactly have this set up, because it's really simple to do. It's all organized in Google Calendar, and the only reason I use Google Calendar for this is that I can access it from any of my devices. I've been using it since forever, but obviously if you want to set up something similar, you can use whatever you like, whatever you're used to. Here's how it's set up. So here I have multiple calendars, and each one is exclusively dedicated to a specific task. So you see that you have admin and accounting. Birthdays is just one of those automatic Google Calendar that I didn't set up. There's blog and other written content, business development, meetings, live performance, lessons. I have literally everything over here. Each one is exclusively dedicated to a specific task type. It looks like I have many, and I kind of do. This got way more complicated in recent years, the more I invested time and energy into my company, Sonoro Cinematic. all of a sudden it wasn't just my work as a composer and sound designer, and things just started to get a bit more complicated, but it's still very simple the way I actually use it. I have all these categories, and since the end of the year now, I put them all in a spreadsheet, and the way I did this was using a very simple and completely free online tool called Google Calendar Hours Calculator. You can just Google it. Here it is. You can simply sign in with your Google account, and here you have all the calendars that you have in your account. And this will tell you exactly how much time you spend on a specific task in a specific time range. And you can also export the results as a CSV file, which is exactly what it is. So for example, if I want to know how much I spent in custom sound design and sound effects in the current year, I spent 113.25 hours over the year, and I can even show details of all the different events. And here you have the export as CSV file option. Thanks to this data, now I know that this year I worked 1,922.25 hours in total, a 5% increase over last year, but better than 2022 when I worked 2,050 hours. These are hours I've actually worked, by the way. They don't include coffee breaks, lunch breaks, or any sort of wasted time you would count if you had a regular office job. But more importantly, now I know exactly on which categories I've spent the most time on. So here I have a direct comparison with 2023, and I also made a very nice pie chart. You can see the big slices right away. Producing VSTs, that is virtual instruments for Sonora Cinematic, is the largest category, followed by writing and producing music. There are several other slices that are considerably big: musical sound design, YouTube. If you spend some time looking at the differences between 2023 and 2024, you can probably easily reverse engineer and work out what my time spending goals for this year were. I essentially wanted to grow Sonora Cinematic, and we really managed. Sonora Cinematic revenue is up 77% compared to last year. But the thing is, I never ever set a specific goal of increasing the revenue for my company. All I did was to actively change my calendar to dedicate more time to Sonora Cinematic. As that was going well, around the summer I decided to change things up a bit and decided to add another element to this. I've been meaning to go back to properly producing content on YouTube and social media. I wanted to get way more consistent at that, and here we are. How did I do this? I looked at my data from the previous year. I knew that the pie, the time I have available, wouldn't get any larger. So if I wanted to spend more time on growing Sonora Cinematic, I had to cut somewhere. I decided to spend way less time on producing sound effects. This category includes basically anything that is sound design but not for musical purposes. This is post-production sound design, game audio, that sort of thing. I enjoy doing that stuff a lot, but I decided to sacrifice it and take way less work in that category. I reduced the amount of hours I spend in this category by 60%. In 2022, I also did some structural changes to my studio, which took up a lot of time. I had to repaint and rewire this whole place, which explains why the category studio setup, tech prepping and fixing issues is so bloated for 2023. Of course, I didn't have to do that this year, so it's another category I knew I could take some time from. I also incidentally managed to cut by 52% the time spent on admin, and interestingly, I'm really not sure how that happened. I'm obviously thrilled by it, as I hate admin. Maybe I got more efficient, I don't know. I need to investigate this. But what's important is, where did I put all these extra hours? So producing virtual instruments for Sonora Cinematic has actually stayed more or less the same. It's only a 2% increase, something like that. But look, I've added a brand new category exactly for this purpose, which wasn't here in 2023. That's business development. And I put 106 hours into working out the best business strategies to implement for Sonora Cinematic. I negotiated deals with distributors. I worked on a release schedule for 2025 and 2026. And most importantly, take a look at Sonora Cinematic marketing and content category. There is a staggering plus 343%, a really massive increase, 185 hours spent on this. And this is only my personal contribution to the business. I also have my amazing colleague Mel that invests a lot of her time on Sonora Cinematic, not to mention all our other collaborators that work with us on a project per project basis. Now it's mid-December and I know broadly what kind of changes I want to make. Even though I have actually written a fair amount of music this year, in fact slightly more than the year before, I have a couple of music related projects I'd really like to go back to for next year. So writing and producing music is mostly the area I want to add some hours to. Where do I get the time? Well, I'm certainly not touching the time dedicated to Sonora Cinematic, but for example, I know that we have a good plan of action for 2025 and part of 2026, so I can predict that business development won't be as loaded. I also need to take a decision on whether basically take even less sound effects work or not. I'm still thinking about that. The point is that I know that music is a priority for next year together with Sonora Cinematic. So what I will do now is to identify the project I want to get done for the first and second quarter of 2025, evaluate how many hours they will roughly take, and start blocking time in my calendar for those. Ideally, I want to start 2025 with maybe 25 to 30% of my working time already blocked. Of course, I'll keep it flexible and leave plenty of free time to allocate to projects as they arrive from my clients. But the idea is to keep track of this data during the year to constantly reevaluate how I spend time. I know this might sound weird and it's certainly not for everybody, but it really works for me. And if you want to try it out, let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you're new to the channel, you'll have noticed in my pie chart that one of the categories I spent the most time on this year is musical sound design. I recently did a video on the business side of being a sound designer, specifically investigating how much you can earn from that gig. If you're interested, take a look here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.